if you look here, by default, if I come down here, you can see now it's going to East US. So make sure you choose the right resource group that you're in. By default, it'll go to East US. So I'm going to choose Australia East. Now I'm going to show you another trick. Now, sometimes if you navigate away from this window, it means you've got to start all over again and move forward. That's time consuming. So go to your web browser, press Control-C. Let's copy that link. Let's open up a new thing, paste that in, and I'm going to go ahead and sign in. So now I've signed into my Azure twice. Now this is going to give me an advantage, because if I need to navigate back and see what resource group I'm in, I can just go to resource groups and I can say, oh yeah, I'm in Australia East. So I come straight back to here and I can make sure I'm in Australia East. So now we need to give our resource group a name. And this can be any name you like. So I'll just call this as a AVD. I'll call it AVD Pool 1. You can, AVD Pool 1. Now we are going to publish a full desktop. We are not going to publish an application. We're going to do a full Windows desktop, because that's what users do. When people work at a company, they log on to Windows so they can do their work. The reason we publish a full desktop is so we can map drives, we can install applications and be productive. So again, now we've got this host pool type. And if we click in the window here, remember we've got personal and of course we got pooled. So if I click personal, we don't want to do personal. If I click on personal, you can see that it says assignment type. If I click on pooled, look how it changes. Now we've got breadth first and depth first. So what is breadth first? Well, breadth first allows you to load balance your pool, the number of VMs you deploy. If we are deploying 20 desktops, we can load balance them. That's what breadth does. It load balances your users across Azure. Then we have depth first. Depth first means if we have, once that session reaches a limit, it'll automatically go to the next pool and log the next user on. So we might say, we'll set that limit, say at 20. Once that node reaches 20 users, automatically, if somebody else logs on, log them onto the next VM. When that session host is full with 20, and then you move on with. So again, which is best depends on your environment. There's no hard and fast rule here. If you're having troubles with bandwidth, load balancing helps. If you have troubles with, other types of congestion, then depth first helps. Again, that depends on your customer's environment. But let's go with breadth first. Now, maximum session limit. Do I want 100 people? Do I want 10,000 people? If you have a look here, you can see the maximum limit that we can have per node. Obviously, we're not going to do that because that's insane. So we'll go ahead. If you want to say you wanted 8 people to connect to that machine, and when 8 people have connected, if there's more people, it will deploy them to another VM. So in our case, I'm just going to type in 2. We only need 2 users because it's just a lab. I want you to just get the fundamentals behind you so that you know how to do this correctly. Now we go next on networking. We are going to leave everything at the default. We are not creating virtual machines yet. We are far away from virtual machines. So I'm going to go next. No, we are not adding virtual machines. We are going to deploy our own virtual machine. Do not click yes. You will dig a hole for yourself. You have to delete everything and start again. Once you get comfortable with AVD, you can click yes. But at this stage, even when I'm deploying in an environment, I never use yes. It's just because too many things can go wrong. Now we go to workspace. No, we're going to create our own workspace. So make sure it's on no. Click next on advanced. Do not enable boot diagnostics. Boot diagnostics allows us to capture logs through Network Watcher and then put them into a storage account where we can actually use Sentinel or Network Monitor, and we can actually read those logs and troubleshoot our environment. Obviously, in the real world, you may want to turn it on, but again, we're not interested at this stage because we're just learning a basic deployment. Tags, no. What is tags used for? Well, tags is used for to name that resource, like sales, contractors, IT admins, finance, marketing. The reason you would tag something, A, it's easy to search, but B, the most important reason we use tags is for billing. Like when you're working in a big company, each department has its own cost center, so they need to be charged for that resource. We're not going to do tags. Do not type anything in tags. Click review and create. This is going to go away and do a validation. Once our validation is completed, if you click create, it's going to create that resource. If you've made any mistakes, like on your breadth first and stuff, we can kind of go back here by clicking on these tabs and moving backwards. So you want to make sure we've got this top section. This is all good. Make sure that yours looks very similar to mine. Then we click review and create. That's going to go ahead and create that host pool. So again, we've deployed that host pool. So all it's going to do is deploy, allow us to, we're going to deploy 2 virtual machines. And of course, that host pool is only going to allow 2 users to connect to it. Obviously, you could have typed in 10 or 20 users if you wanted to. That's up to you. And as you can see, the bell notification tells us exactly what's going on in our environment. Always good practice to pay attention to this, because this again is always good to know what's going on in our environment. So once we are here, the next thing we want to do is go to the top and type AVD and select Azure Virtual Desktops. The reason I'm getting you to do this is so that you get comfortable with working with your Azure Virtual Desktop. So once you have done that, I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we will move forward. I'll give you a few minutes to do that, to deploy your host pool. And then once your host pool is deployed, we will then have some fun as we go through our environment. So again, once you've deployed your host pool, navigate back to your Azure Virtual Desktop environment. Once you've navigated to your virtual desktop environment, click on host pools, and you should see your host pool over here. If you don't see your host pool, hit refresh. Hit refresh a couple of times just to make sure your host pool is there. So when we are at this screen, guys, can you all let me know, please? So again, when we are at our host pool, just let me know when you are at the screen.
Yes, we're there.
Here. Okay, you have fantastic. So now click on your host pool. Not in the box. Click on the name, host pools. I'm just going to move this to the side so I've got some more real estate. And as you can see now, this takes us to our host pools. We've got no virtual machines. We've got no active sessions. We've got nothing yet. So what I want you to do is I want you to come down to session hosts. Underneath manage, click session hosts. Now, this is where we can go now and we can start deploying our virtual machines. So again, it's really important that you be vigilant. And what makes a good engineer? Can anyone tell me what makes a good engineer? Is it brains? Is it talent? What makes someone exceptional? What makes someone exceptional? Sorry, carry on.
Paying attention to details, ensuring everything is All as should.
Absolutely perfect. That's what makes an amazing engineer. You'll see all these other people in IT, these IT celebrities and stuff, and you'll go, wow, this guy, he or she's so clever. They have the same brain as you. The difference is they pay attention. If you're driving your car, or you are writing a Word document or an email, when you're writing an email to somebody, do you look out the window and type like this? When you drive, do you look down like this? Why don't you look down when you're driving? And when you're typing, why don't you look the other way?
Because you gotta pay attention and you gotta be focused, so you can get to your destination or get to the best goal you are anticipating for.
Correct. And if you don't focus, accident. So what we want to do now is, now we're in session host, click add. Now, if you notice, all of this is grayed out. Very quickly, why is it grayed out, guys? The reason it's grayed out is because we've already selected those as we were going about our deployment. So Microsoft have been kind for us. They've already populated that for us. So now we can create our virtual machines. So now we're going to go next on virtual machine. So now we have to give our virtual machine a prefix name. Now I'm going to call mine, I'll call mine, say, AVD. Let's do it in capitals. Now, you've all renamed a computer. You might deploy a Windows computer and it's called Windows 10. So when you rename a computer, this is going to be our computer name. So it will start with AVD01, and as you add machines, 02, 03, 04, 05, it keeps things constant. More importantly, you can change this. You could say IT support, or you could put your company name so we know what it is. The most important thing we want to make sure is we're in the Australia East location. Make sure you're in the right location. Now we've got availability zones. By default, it's going to go to availability zones. Now, availability zones allow us to access our infrastructure should Azure fall over. And yes, Azure does fall over because they do maintenance and stuff. So obviously in the real world, you would select availability zones. But in our case, click in the availability zones box and select no infrastructure. We don't need any redundancy. So make sure in the availability options, you don't have zones or availability sets. Make sure you say no infrastructure or redundancy is required. Now it says here launch trusted virtual machines. Click in the trusted virtual machine and go ahead and click standard. We're not going to worry about these other things. So all trusted does protects against advanced attacks using the Microsoft generation version 2 VM features like the virtual trusted platform module or TPM module. Of course, we can also use confidential virtual machines, which on top of that offers higher confidentiality and integrity on hardware-based execution environments. We're not going to worry about that. We are just going to select the top one, basic, because again, the whole idea is all about deploying a virtual machine. Now in the image window here, if I click in here, look what we have here, multi-session. And we've got various versions of Windows 11, and we've got various versions of Windows Server as well. Now, you can see here, we've got Microsoft Enterprise version 22H with Office 365. We've got 22H2 with nothing. Then you say, but hang on, Ryan, we've got 21H here and 21H here. What did I say to you? Microsoft always deploy the 2 latest versions of VMs. Now, believe it or not, when you go and buy Windows 10, Windows 10 comes with a version, and the version changes based on security updates and features that Microsoft have built into the operating system. So I'm going to scroll down and hey, let's select Windows 11 multi-session with Office 365. So I'm going to do the bottom one here, and it's going to select that. Now, this is the number of VMs we want to deploy. Do I want to deploy 100 VMs, 50 VMs? It all depends on your environment. So you're probably saying to yourself, well, how do I know how many VMs to deploy? Well, your solutions architect will tell you. But you might say, well, but I'm the solutions architect. Then I'll say, well, you need to think about how many people you got in your organization. Have you got 100 people? Have you got 50 people? And then carve that up in sections. You might say, well, I'm going to allow 5 people per VM or 10 people per VM. Therefore, you are not putting such a load on one node. So that's up to you at the end of the day. In our case, we are just going to deploy 2 VMs. So again, this is where you could type in 200 VMs. So again, you need to have a look at this, because when you're working in your organization, and I've seen this happen, and it causes so many problems. People just, I'll just guess them. Yeah, let's roll the dice. It's not lottery. You don't want to do any guesswork here. You want to actually say, okay, well, how many people need access to a virtual machine? Okay, we've got 30 people. Okay, 30 people, you can run that quite comfortably on one VM, depending on how big your environment is. I would say don't go more than, if you've got an environment that has hundreds and hundreds of people, try and find a medium, carve it up, maybe 10 VMs per person. So you can do that. But in our case, we are only going to deploy two VMs. And the reason I'm getting you to deploy 2 VMs is so that you can see some differences. Again, obviously in the industry, you would want to use premium SSD. There is a bit of a price difference. For our lab, you can use standard SSD. You want to disable boot diagnostics because we don't want to capture any logs. Now, remember, I got you to create a virtual network. I've seen people go about deploying their virtual machine and they go, I can't go any further. It's asking me for a virtual network. Well, did you deploy your VM, your virtual network? No. So again, we click in here and there's our virtual network. So that's why we have to deploy a virtual network. So, and there's our subnet. So it's easy for me to manage. I can see if that just said default and I had 10 VMs to deploy, I'm going to see default, default, default. And I don't know, is that finance? Is that sales? Is that marketing? I'm going to, like, what the hell's going on? Again, our security group, we can do advanced if we want to, none. So this is an NSG group. So let's just leave it at basic. And we're going to scroll all the way down. This is where I see people running into hot water. Again, we've got domain to join. Now, if you have an on-prem Windows server running Active Directory and your Active Directory is synced with Azure Active Directory, then you can actually use that. But in our environment, we have Azure Active Directory. It's built in. If I bounce over to my users here and I go to Active Directory and I go to my users, you can see here, I've got my ADD users over here. So in our case, we want to use Azure Active Directory. We don't have a Windows Active Directory on-prem. If you do, you could use that. And if we use that, it would ask you for the admin credentials for your domain, and then you can go ahead and connect. So in our case, let's select Azure Active Directory. Now, we can enroll virtual machines with another utility called Intune. We can deploy applications with Intune. That works nicely with Microsoft Office 365. Again, we're not worried about Intune. Forget about that. We are wanting to do this. Now it's asking me now for a username and password. Do I suck thumbs and roll dice? Where do I get that username and password from? Anybody? Teresa, where would I get that username and password from? It doesn't matter if you answer it wrong.
Sorry, I didn't get the question, sir.
Where do I get that username and password from? Sorry,
I think you'll be needing to generate it yourself.
No.
You need to generate it from the administrator
Okay.
account.
No, it comes from
You
here.
can.
It comes from
Active
Directory. You need to create your user. So you have to create the user. Don't generate it from sucking your thumb. You cannot connect to it. It's an Active Directory domain. If I don't have a user on Active Directory, can I connect to the network? No.
Oh.
You would have your computer, you press Alt Control Delete and you log on. That Alt Control Delete credentials comes from where? From Active Directory. So you need to create a user. So you probably say, well, how do I create a user in Active Directory? Well, let's do that.